In a previous video, we talked about the geohash library for DynamoDB, and we showed how you could abstract away all the complexity of handling nearest and furthest type queries by using this library. So at the end of that video, we had a DynamoDB table populated with a list of Starbucks that I found on the internet, in the US-based Starbucks at least, and we populated that table and we queried the results. It left us pretty much at this stage where we could type in node query against this piece of code and it would give us the nearest list of Starbucks from this latitude and longitude position. Today what I want to do is show you how we can strap a front end to this so you end up with a pretty looking front end where if you click around a Google map it'll show you those results. So let's get started. So if you look in the repo that you downloaded in the last exercise, and the URL's on the screen now, what we're going to do is take this query that we've run locally in our terminal and wrap it in an Express application so that it can be called as an endpoint through API Gateway. So look in the index.js file and what you'll see is that there's a little bit of boilerplate up here, but this is the same function that you saw in query.js, just with a little bit of Express magic wrapped around it. So what this will do is it will sit there and if run locally it'll listen for a call to the local host. If it's running remotely it'll wait for API Gateway to initiate the function. Now we can test this locally fairly easily. So down in our terminal here all we need to do is make sure I'm in the right directory and type node index. So this is now listening on port 3001. Now the next step you'll need an application called Postman. There are other ways to do this too, but Postman has a really nice interface and makes it very easy. You can download it at the URL on the screen now. Once you've downloaded and installed it, what you'll see is an application that looks like this. I have lots of tabs because I use it all the time, but the key thing is to go into a new tab, make sure you've selected Post because that's the type of query we have here, and then type in localhost 3001. Now for this type of query, this is expecting a raw body of type JSON with a latitude and longitude. So make sure you copy this type of syntax. And then when you hit send, if I just move this up slightly, you'll see the same results appearing here. And this is basically the same as what we saw before, but instead we're running it through Postman. So this is a simple way to test Express applications locally on your machine, which I do all the time because you don't always want to deploy while you're testing minor changes. The next step is to push this up to Lambda. So if I just Control-C there, we'll be using serverless framework, so we just need to type SLS deploy. So that takes a few seconds to deploy, but once it's finished you have this API endpoint available to you. If you copy that and put that into Postman, take out the port number and hit send with the same body, you'll see you get the same response, but this time the query is running in the cloud. And if you run it a few times, you'll get a sense of how quickly it's running. Here I'm seeing about 500 milliseconds. So take a note of this API endpoint because we'll be needing that for the next step as we deploy the front end. Okay, so for the front end part of this project, you need to clone this Git repo which has all the front end code in it. If you unpack that into a directory, you'll see these files here. Make sure you run npm install just to make sure all the different node modules are installed for you. The very first thing you'll need to do is get a Google Maps API key, and the URL is on the screen now. This will be your personal API key for Google Maps. If you're planning to put this in production, you need to make sure you protect this API key by locking it down to a particular domain name or IP address, depending on your use case. Don't just put the API key out in the wild because you'll end up suffering from quota theft when people find that key. Now once you've done that, you just need to put that into the main.js file that's here into line 9 and add in your key. This will be then used for your project. Now you remember we needed the API gateway key as well from earlier. This is where you'll paste this in the app.vue file on line 58 just here. And once you've added those two things, this is basically ready to go. But before we start it up, let me walk you through what this actually does. So VueJS is a fantastic framework because we can basically build real-time front-end applications very easily with very little work. And to give you an idea of how easy it is, this is really a one-line application that handles all the interaction with Google Maps. The template section at the top shows you the layout of what the application will look like. It's nothing pretty in this case. There's a couple of headers and some paragraph text, but this is the heart of the application. And there's some basic configuration of what this will look like. It sets a zoom level, what type of Google Map we'll be using, and just some basic sizing on the screen when the user opens the browser. The most important thing it does is it uses an on-click event to fire some code below, which we'll cover next. The markers are what will be displaying the results on the map, and the circle is the light blue area that just outlines the radius of the search that the user has selected. Now the real work happens a bit further down, and this script section, what we do here is update center is called whenever a user clicks the map. It will clear the existing markers and set a new center based upon the latitude and longitude that's handed in from this event during the click. Using the Axios library, we then call the endpoint we've pasted in there, handing in this latitude and longitude. And if you remember from Postman, it's basically exactly the same as us doing this. We take the results from the Axios call and then iterate through the locations that are provided to add these to the markers and push them into an array which is connected to the Google Maps component. The neat thing about this is we don't have to do any type of refresh or management of the map. The map knows to look at these markers, so we just need to make sure the markers are up to date with whatever we get back from our endpoint. Now this is the absolute minimum code you can use to run this. I would recommend much more error handling and transitioning in production, but at least it shows how we can build a front end that does this. So let's test what we've built. So all we need to do is type in npm run serve. That takes a few seconds, but then once it's ready, just follow the link localhost there, and you can see that you now have your map. Now the first time you click, you'll notice it's a bit slower than other times. That's because of the cold start issue of the function hasn't been called in a while, so it takes a little bit longer to start. But you'll notice in subsequent clicks that it's actually more responsive. There are no Starbucks there. And New York's a good place to look around for this just because there are so many Starbucks, so it gives you a good sense of how the application is performing. Now once you've played, this is currently running on your local host. The next step is to push it to production. So back here I'll just Control-C out of this, and it's the same command just with a slight change, npm run build. This takes a few seconds, and then you'll notice there's a new folder called dist that's available up here. Now dist contains this different version of files like index.html that's very hard to read, and you'll notice there's a JS folder and a CS folder that contain the JavaScript and CSS files needed. Now to push this to a public serving place, all you need to do is copy the contents of the dist file to a public readable S3 bucket. So let me show you how we do that. In my S3 console, I'm going to create a new bucket. For the sake of the demo, I'm going to allow the use of public ACLs and making objects publicly readable just to make it simple. In production, it's better to keep the bucket private and just use CloudFront to point to the bucket to open it to the public. Okay, now we have this empty bucket. Now the next step is to make it so you can serve a static website through the bucket. We'll just say OK and set the default object to index.html and the error document to the same. Take a note here of the endpoint that you get from the bucket. Usually it follows exactly this format. Now once you have this, go back to the bucket. Now all you need to do is upload that directory. So I've opened an Explorer to show you the contents of that directory. We're going to take all of those and just copy them across. Make sure you grant public access to those objects. And hit upload. Okay, that's done. And then the URL we copied just a moment ago, the endpoint for the bucket, if we run this, now you'll see that your map is running in a public URL that can be accessed from anywhere. So critically, don't forget to secure your API key for Google Maps. It's very easy to forget that. Vue has a couple of options that let you provide keys for development environments versus production environments. So I suggest just checking up on those to make sure you don't accidentally leak your key. Google Maps is cheap to use, but if you find that your key gets out there, you can get unexpected charges. So that's how easy it is to build a real-time front end for your serverless backend. And in this case, we took a very simple query that returned a list of nearest Starbucks given the latitude and longitude for a certain range, and we threw it into a Google map using this Vue application. It's pretty straightforward. But if you have any questions, feel free to reach out to me on Twitter at JBESW or drop a comment here on the video. And if this was helpful, don't forget to subscribe to my channel.